Pakistan because of the limitations on its resources and the huge dependence that it had on Chinese military hardware, was thirsty for actually sophisticated Western technologies, which often are more robust and reliable than the Chinese ones. And so for them, Turkey became a natural choice. So there was a certain symmetry between the two sides that came up in the military context.
You're on The Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. My guest is Sanjay Bhattacharya, former ambassador to Turkey, and that gives you the idea as to what the subject of our conversation is going to be. It's all about Turkey, India, the bilateral relationship, President Erdogan, and all that stuff. So, Sanjay Bhattacharya, welcome. Great to have you.
Lovely to be with you again, Surya. Great to see you and delighted to be on Strat News.
Sanjay, Turkey. We've had quite a few hiccups in the past few months. And where do you see the relationship? You were there not very long ago. Was it as bad then? Is it worse now? And what is it?
Oh, I think what happened in the last couple of weeks, in particular, was quite difficult. I would say if the president of a country assures brotherly relations and brings up the Kashmir issue on the day that the Pahalgam terrorist attacks happened, and if the foreign ministry of that country condemns Op Sindoor, which was in retaliation to the terrorist strikes, and again brings up the question of Kashmir and settling issues, it may be to show their brotherly affection to Pakistan, but it is certainly unfriendly towards India.
But it was not always like this, was it? In your time, was it like this?
Well, let us say that, in wartime, this was not quite a war, but it was something like things are often seen and viewed a little differently. I would say even when 2019, when 370 was abrogated, the Turks did not take it in the right spirit. And I think there were certain reasons for it, the way they moved. But I actually see this India-Turkey relation in a slightly different context, because the shift of Turkey towards Pakistan, towards having Pakistan as the preferred partner, had probably begun in the 1950s. And when Nehru traveled to Turkey in 1960, one of his main reasons, objectives, was because he'd realized that Turkey was going adrift, and he wanted to correct that. And the Turks, of course, are very sweet to him. We got our embassy premises on that particular occasion. But I think from the mid-50s onwards, when both Turkey and Pakistan were alliance partners of the US, I think it was probably 54 when Turkey and Pakistan signed the Defense Cooperation Agreement, that shift had started happening. But there was a difference. I think the secular governments in Turkey, which was what had prevailed till recently, they had a more independent position on the relations between India and Turkey vis-a-vis Turkey and Pakistan. And therefore, they always had a more balanced approach, so to say. But that, of course, began to change with Erdogan.
Okay, so let's come to Erdogan. What is it with him? Is it all the talk of reclaiming the caliphate and all that? Is that actually true? And what is his interest in Pakistan? What is there in Pakistan?
I suspect that, Erdogan is a very charismatic leader. And I think he's also been very people friendly and responsive to the the demands of the people. And so if you look at his long reign of over 2 decades, the first half of it is really one in which he brought economic development to Turkey,
Hmm.
often unprecedented scale. So Turkey today is an amazing economy with huge infrastructure, and it's modeled on a very modern lines. So he gave it to the people, the benefits that development does. But I think in the second half, there was a shift towards the Islamist idea, if I may call it that. And remember, when before he'd become prime minister, in 2002, he had been put into jail for having played that Islamist card,
Yeah.
and he and Erbakan, who he was, a follower of, um, had gradually kind of modulated Turkey's polity somewhat away from the Islamist line. But I think in over a period of time, it came back. And when Erdogan was trying to push his Islamist line, of course, there was the strong support of his very close relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Hmm.
And that did not endear him to his neighbors, the Arabs. And if
Hmm.
he was to become the leader of the Islamic world, and if the Arabs were not with him, then who were the people that he would
Yeah.
go for? So he went to
Yeah.
the four Turks in Central Asia. He said South Asia looks like a good target, Southeast Asia. And I think he found great support in Pakistan and to some extent in Malaysia and in some of our neighboring countries as well. But I don't think he really got the support within India because I think India really did not fall in with the brotherhood ideology. And so, in some ways, I see um, Pakistan as being a loyal ally of his particular Islamist agenda and a great ally. And so he used it as a springboard. So the kind of moves that you saw that he has in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, in Maldives, have a brotherhood connection, have a Pakistan connection,
Hmm.
and some of it didn't quite work because of Malaysia wanting a more dominant role in Southeast Asia. But you see that this was part of his agenda.
Hmm. So he is trying to build up his Islamic credentials with this outreach to South Asia, Southeast Asia. Is that what you're telling me?
I think, to a large extent, the transformation within the country has happened because
Okay.
today the religious factor is quite dominant in the dissemination of social services, on the educational side, in some of the financial services. And today you find, the role of the Diyanet, which is very active even in their overseas development assistance, their ODA, their foreign policy outreach has this component. And he's also used it very effectively in parts of Africa as well. So there is a certain angle which is present. Um, but I think also because it's such a large entity,
Hmm.
Turkey, that its diplomatic footprint is also very large, and you see them involved in all sorts of places at all sorts of times. So there are different cards that this great nation is playing, and Turkey, of course, is a very sophisticated and very complex economy, as well as a very highly developed polity. It has various elements of Western orientation on the one hand, but yet on the other, there is a sort of clawback, as you would have seen in the last decade and more in particular.
So, what does he want to make of Turkey? Some kind of an Islamic republic, Sharia law and all that? It is. What are his aims there internally?
I think he's a very pragmatic person, and he knows that the people of Turkey are really split down the middle on this because there are many Turks, and you've seen his majority dwindling in the various elections that he has contested. He's always come out on top. He's
Yeah.
extremely charismatic. Um, but you do see that he knows that the people of Turkey will not yet buy it all the way, and so those who buy become part of his new elites. And
Mhm.
so there is a certain currency that is generated within the country. Outside the country, I think it's still a project, and I don't think much of it has happened apart from the active role that the Muslim Brotherhood on the one hand and the Diyanat on the other play. To some
Mhm.
extent, this has also been a blockage for his development of ties with the Arab world. He's mended fences with some of them, but he's still not seen without skepticism. So it's an ongoing thing for him. But he's a very cautious and very smart person.
Mhm. So the outreach to Pakistan, the sale of arms. I mean, I presume he's selling it because I mean, I'm not even sure Pakistan has money to pay for them. It kind of shows you steady incremental growth in their commitment, isn't it?
I would say that there were perhaps three elements that contributed to this deepening of ties that have actually been there for several decades. The first, of course, is this Islamist angle, because ever since for the last 30 years or more, you've seen this become a trend even in Pakistan. So there was a certain commonality in that particular aspect. While Nawaz Sharif was not really a brotherhood advocate or devotee, there were
Mm.
certain connections that they had. And more important than that, I think Nawaz Sharif had a very close personal relation with Erdogan, and I think that personal chemistry, which I call as a second factor, was very important. And today, in some ways, it has kind of passed on to his brother. The relations with Imran were a little testy in the beginning, and you would probably recall that when Erdogan was on a visit to Pakistan, Imran and his party had staged a boycott.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and it wasn't taken very well at that point of time in Turkey. But I think the greater bonding with Turkey and the advantages that Turkey would provide to Pakistan at a time when it was losing the support of many of its earlier uh, friends and allies in the Islamic world. Many of the Gulf states were not as supportive of Turkey once the terrorist connections of Pakistan became much more common knowledge. Um, so at that point of time, I think that personal chemistry worked very well. And then the third thing that happened was that, at a time when Turkey's economy was actually going down, which was, the last 5, 10 years, they've been having a difficult time. And some of the policies that they follow are not quite, consistent with the theory that we know of. There was one part of the Turkish economy that was actually doing very well, and that was the military industrial complex. And
Mhm.
it became a very sophisticated. So today it's a very sophisticated military industrial complex. A lot of it has connections with the AK Party as well. And they found a very ready and available client in Pakistan. Also, let us not forget that Pakistan, because of the limitations on its resources and the huge dependence that it had on Chinese military hardware, was thirsty for actually sophisticated Western technologies,
Mhm.
which often are more robust and reliable than the Chinese ones. And so for them, Turkey became a natural choice. So there was a certain symmetry between the two sides that came up in the military context. And so Turkey built frigates for Islamabad. They upgraded their F-16s. And very importantly, the new warfare doctrines, which have much greater influence of electronic warfare, drones today, and Turkey is a leading manufacturer in the drone technology, and you've seen their efficacy in the Russia-Ukraine theater. So I
Absolutely.
think there were certain commonalities that came about, which I would say was the third factor which bonded them in this particular context.
Mhm. I recall the late President Musharraf. He had something going for Turkey too.
I think the Pakistanis have always had a very deep sense of admiration for Turkey. Many in Pakistan claim to have Turkish blood in them,
Hmm.
and there is a very large non-resident Pakistani contingent that has settled down in Turkey, very, very large, and
Mhm.
many of them have developed family ties. So for them, the links are actually quite deep, and in some ways, Pakistan's search for an identity beyond 1947
Mhm.
finds an expression in their partnership with Turkey and in the Turkish past, and so they have also used that to some extent.
Mhm. Did you? Is there a certain animus when they think of India, when they talk of India? Um, do you discern at your time? Did you get that sense?
I would very categorically say no. I think if you go to Turkey and you meet the people of Turkey, they are the most warm and friendly and wonderful people, industrious, hardworking. They take on a project and they'll do it to their best. They have, great affection and admiration for India at the popular level. At the official level, as I was saying, I think in the past there was always a balanced approach when we had secular governments in Turkey. And what has probably evolved over time, if I may put it that way, is that over a period of time they have started to look at India through the lens of Pakistan. And
Mhm.
so, very often, the words and the phrases that you find Erdogan, pronouncing would quite easily have come from Islamabad. You sometimes don't see the difference between the
Yeah.
two, and I found it quite interesting that in this particular instance, the Turkish pronouncements and official statements were much harsher than even China, which of course is, the
Okay.
so-called ironclad partner of Pakistan.
Mhm.
And so that looking at another country, India, through the lens of a third country, Pakistan, is something that has happened over time. Um, I did somehow sense this even when I was there. And it had come even before that because the records indicate that the shift had happened earlier. Um, but I think that brought a big change in the way Turkey dealt with India, and particularly on political strategic issues and how issues pertaining to Kashmir or minority issues would always provoke Turkey into making comments. It's not that we haven't had political differences in the past. The
Mhm.
differences regarding Kashmir were have been there for decades, as there have been differences regarding, Armenia or Cyprus, and both sides are aware of that. But they have never been made public issues. We discuss them as diplomats do, but in recent times, particularly that Pakistan lens has brought them into the public forum
Mhm.
and coming out much more frequently, and often in phraseology that is more echoing the Pakistan mindset.
Mhm. So, what does India do in this kind of situation? Do you think it's largely driven by Erdogan? Is there a broader consensus in Turkey that this is the way to go with Pakistan?
I think the opposition has a very different perspective on this.
Mhm.
I found many within the AK party also to have a different perspective on this. And I think most of them prefer to have a more balanced relation with India as they used to in the past. I think both India and Turkey are great nations which have had the benefit of experiencing real economic growth, bringing about social development. I think to some extent our polity has been more stable than many others,
Yeah.
but there are great commonalities between our path that we have adopted and the objective. Turkey is a G20 economy. They are a very sophisticated and diverse economy. There are many complementarities between us. It has a huge political diplomatic footprint. It matters in regional matters, and it has a voice even on global issues. And I think that needs to be recognized because a lot of that is in alignment with the way we see the world. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And so I think as both of us embark on our respective missions, because we, after all, our mission is to become a great nation, to become a
True.
developed country. I think today Pakistan is much less of a factor for us than it
Yeah.
was in the past. I mean, of course, we've just had a very unfortunate set of incidents following their terrorist attack. But otherwise, we have no reason to look at our relations with our other partners, whether we see equally on all issues or not, through the Pakistani lens. So we don't need to make the mistake that Turkey did about India. We don't need to make that same mistake about
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
through the Pakistani lens
Hmm.
at Turkey. And so we need to develop an independent approach. I think what came out of Turkey at this particular juncture, a very sensitive point in our history, was not friendly. And I think it needs to be asserted in that particular way. I think there was a certain popular outrage, and I think that must play its course. But at the official level, I think there are three things that we need to do. The first is that we must recognize that our diplomatic endeavors have largely been successful. Turkey makes
Mhm.
all the noise, but it really doesn't carry much weight. So apart from Azerbaijan, I can't think of any other country that said the kind of things that Turkey did. And I think
Yeah.
the kind of support that that particular idea has in the rest of the world is not present. So I think we need to step it up. Turkey is also a leading voice in the OIC as a key player in the Kashmir contact group within the OIC, and it's a bit of an irritant, but I think it's
Hmm.
just an irritant. So we need to dampen this particular idea through diplomatic efforts. I think a lot of it has already worked, but I think we need to work much more actively on Turkey and deal with this bilaterally with them and to make them understand that there can be other things that will be better achieved in mutual interest. The second one is that you can't really prevent countries from having defense relations with your adversaries.
Hmm. Yeah.
You can have some kind of leverage which you can develop, but you can't totally wish it away. And I think the fact is that Pakistan will seek hardware and weapon systems from various parties, and Turkey has some very good weapon systems. We were able to thwart it at this juncture, but I think we should upgrade our defense preparedness so that we can deal with this much more effectively because the Turks do have better weapons than what we had seen in terms of the drone swarms on this occasion. The third
Mhm.
thing that I think that we need to do, and this probably has to be on a more continuous and careful basis, is an evaluation of what exactly we wish to do with Turkey. I think there would be certain strategic items where we probably collaborate or could collaborate, and I think those will require much closer attention and much more caution as long as Turkey continues to speak the language of Pakistan.
Mhm.
Then there is another aspect, which is largely economic. Our trade is over $10 billion, some $500 million of two-way investments. All our big companies are invested in each other. They are so heavily, engaged in our infrastructure sector, in many of the metros or the tunneling of critical infrastructure in the Himalayan region, and they have great technologies, and we collaborate on many of them very, very effectively and to mutual benefit. I think those will need to be evaluated from the perspective of our development objectives. Does it serve our purpose or does it not? Is it actually detrimental? So if it is not, then I think I would be persuaded to saying that we should continue the engagement while we work on changing the mindset that is there in the current Turkish regime.
So, last question. In Erdogan's party, is he the man who is singularly responsible for the um, deterioration in relations or the outreach to Pakistan? Does that reflect a broader thing within the party too?
My sense is that there is a certain community and certain elites, both at the political and economic levels, including, as I was mentioning, in the military industrial complex, that
Mhm.
have developed a certain transactional benefit in this Turkey Pakistan relationship. And these objectives could be economic, could be political, could be ideological, depending on which sector of Turkey they come from and who
Mhm.
they interact with on the Pakistan side. But there are all shades of that. So there is a certain support group, a faction that is supportive of this relationship with Pakistan. But I would say that the almost the entire opposition and many segments within the party
Mhm.
prefer a more balanced approach. They also see that a partnership with India, which is based on the principles of economic growth and development, in which India will be a much more leading player than Pakistan ever will be. That a partnership with India, which is an established democracy, and Turkey uh, wishes to be a greater democracy as well. They've had elections, and I think their elections were not rigged, um, um, uh, but they would wish their democracy to develop and thrive, and India would be a sterling example. They wish to play a very much more important role in the emerging global order. And while we may not see eye to eye on the reform of the UN Security Council, on the broader aspect of a greater representation for emerging economies and regional powers and rising powers in the new global structure, we are in alignment. So I think Turkey has many, many factions who are in sympathy with the old approach of having a balanced relationship with India as with Pakistan, having an independent perspective, not guided by what Pakistan says, but making its own assessment. And I think that time will come again. I can't see why the current misadventure has to continue interminably.
Mhm. You think Erdogan is ready to retire?
I think leadership succession in many systems is a very difficult process, and
Mm.
in that part of the world, it's even more difficult. So there is no planning that is done for that, and so it's like you get to that stage where you probably are not contributing as much to the overall national objectives, but there's no one to tell you that you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Sanjay, that was excellent perspective. Great talking to you. And let's hope we can revisit this subject going forward. Thank you very much, Sanjay. Great again talking to you. Great perspective.
Thank you, Surya. It's always a pleasure, and I always remain optimistic about India-Turkey relations because I think we shall craft the future, even if we have difficulties today.
On that positive note, Sanjay, thanks very much. Great talking to you.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this broadcast. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day.